Question number 3, the Honourable Annette King.
My question's to the Minister of Health. What inflationary pressures have not been covered in Vote Health since 2009-10?
The Honourable Dr Jonathan Coleman.
Mr Speaker, the average inflation increase since 2009 has been 1.7%, while the average increase to the operating baseline for health in this time has been 2.6%. Only a national government can both handle the country's finances and deliver more health services.
Supplementary question,
the Honourable Annette King.
Is it an honest approach for him to say on the 29th of July that health funding covers most but not all inflationary pressures, but on 5 occasions since in this House denied that he said it, slithered around the answer, or has blamed the previous Labor government of 8 years ago?
The Honourable Dr Jonathan Coleman.
Providing a political answer. Look, it is. But what I can say is I don't think it's particularly honest for Annette King to come into this House, make it look like everything's bad in the health system, when in actual fact, when she's out in the community, she says the national government's actually doing pretty well. She also says that the decisions around Southern DHB were the right one, that the HBL decision was good.
Order. Order. A member will stand, withdraw that remark immediately.
I'll leave. I will leave.
Does the Minister's complete his answer? Further supplementaries?
Mr Speaker, thank you.
Supplementary question, the Honourable Annette King.
Has he now been made aware that DHBs are cutting home health to frail, old, sick New Zealanders because they don't have the funding to meet the demand? If so, what's his response?
Again, either of those two supplementary questions, the Honourable
Mr Speaker,
Jonathan
I think you'll find that the member is referring to the situation in Mid-Central, where the budget's gone up by $98 million under this government. I'm actually well aware of this issue, and this government and Mid-Central are determined to deliver the best possible home and personal care for patients there. I think she'll find that this will all be sorted out.
Supplementary question.
Supplementary question, the Honourable Annette King.
Well, in light of that answer, why should a 74-year-old sick and disabled woman, Catherine from Whangarei, have her, who's written to him twice and he hasn't replied, have her home help cut from 3 hours a fortnight to 1 hour a fortnight, something her doctors called elder neglect? Not Mid-Central Health, Whangarei.
The Honourable Dr Jonathan Coleman.
Mr Speaker, I'm not aware of that case, but if the member would like to forward it to me, I'll have a look at it, because we're determined that people receive the services that they deserve and that they need.
Supplementary question, Mr Speaker.
Supplementary question, the Honourable Annette King.
Well, in light of that answer, if he gets round to reading this woman's correspondence...
Order. That sort of interjection into the question will cause disorder. I invite the member to start a question
If the Minister answers the woman's correspondence where she tells him she has lots of falls, lives alone and has diabetes, will he then realise that tricky figures and finger-pointing are no replacement for sufficient funding and good care?
That's right. The Honourable Dr Jonathan Coleman.
As the member said herself, it's better to help patients than to use them. I suggest that she forwards me those address details and we look into it, because actually, if what Mrs King says is correct, it's unacceptable. So we've got to make sure that that person gets the right help. And Mrs King would do a lot more good by picking up the phone, working collaboratively, as she claims to do when she's outside the House, and saying, hey, Jonathan, there's an issue here with a sick patient. But no, she can't resist the temptation to make political capital out of it. That's very unfortunate.
Some of us have got long memories.
Supplementary question,
Mr Speaker. Has he replied to Mrs Oliver, who wrote to him on Friday, saying that cuts to home care for older people will lead to more injuries, more older people requiring residential care, and will cost the health system more, bad optics and even worse economics?
The Honourable Dr Jonathan Coleman.
Well, Mr Speaker, I get about 200 letters a week. I can't recall that particular one, but once again, if Mrs King wants to be as collaborative as she claims she is out in public, why doesn't she just pick up the phone and talk over this case, if there really is one there at all, and if it's not actually a member of the Labor Party?
Order. I do. Question number